Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Masterclass episode with Michelle Henne. So, if you've had a chance to check out the podcast episode, you already know that we're going to go into a deep dive on psychological safety. And the working title, should I give away the working title or not yet? I mean, I guess people have already read it.
Well,
So, yeah.
let's
So,
go.
lions, hippos, and elephants, oh my, a deep dive into psychological safety. So, definitely excited in the podcast. I loved what you had to say about the importance of psychological safety and building effective teams. Really hit home for me because I've been parts of teams that did not have that, obviously, where we were not
Mm,
free to say what we wanted to say. And I've been parts of teams where we definitely could do that. So, very excited to learn more about this. So, take it away.
yeah. Well, I guess just upfront, it probably would be helpful just to just make sure everyone's on the same page for what psychological safety is.
Absolutely.
So there are a few different definitions of it, but most commonly, psychological safety exists when people feel safe and comfortable to express their thoughts and opinions, and even when they have concerns about something. They can share that openly without fearing that they're going to be shamed or ridiculed, or there'll be retribution or some kind of punishment for that. So that's what we're talking about. And psychological safety, as we talked about in the podcast, is regarded as one of the very critical aspects of very highly functioning teams. So that's why we want to go into a deep dive on it here in the masterclass. So I thought maybe we'd start off. I wanted to tell a story, a true story. I mentioned before, my mom was an OR nurse,
Hmm.
and so early in her career, she was first working in the OR, and she was head nurse in her 20s. So this is in the 1960s, and she told me there was a surgery. It was a fairly basic, I think it was like an appendectomy or something, and the anesthesiologist was intubating the patient, and he didn't check after. So he intubated, but he didn't check with his stethoscope. And I'm not sure of all the, but apparently you have to
Hmm.
check to make sure that it's actually the air is going into the lungs. And he didn't check. And so she noticed this and she was concerned. And so she tried gingerly to kind of suggest, like, oh, can I clean your stethoscope for you? Or like just to kind of like jog his memory. And he just kind of ignored her, brushed her off. And she was concerned because she thought she could see the abdomen, the patient's abdomen rising and falling, not the chest. And so she gingerly said, doctor, would you like to check that? And she was soundly put in her place and told that that who was she to speak to an anesthesiologist? And if she said another word, that would be her job. So she backed off, and the patient died because they were improperly
Oh,
intubated.
no.
Yeah. And so it was kind of covered up, hush hush. But she never forgot. She
Mm.
felt the weight of that. She felt, somewhat responsible because she saw it, but she wasn't able to share it in a way that resulted in that patient's life being saved. So when I think of psychological safety, that story always comes to mind for me. And there are a few factors that play into it, and so I think you can kind of see them in that story. The first is where there's a strong, some people call it a power differential, some people call it power distance index. So where there's a real hierarchy, a very visible hierarchy. And even, in a clinic in those days, the hierarchy was visible in that the color scrubs that people wore,
Mm.
like you could
Hmm.
tell who was who and how they ranked
Wow.
based on their scrubs. So in that case, the power differential was very clear. In fact, my mom would tell me about how when the doctor would approach the nurse's station, they'd all be like busily writing their notes and stuff, and they'd have to stand.
Oh, my gosh.
And the doctor would just be there shooting the breeze, but they all had to stand until they left. And so they couldn't get any work done while the doctor was shooting the
Oh, my
breeze or
gosh.
whatever. And the same thing when they would be standing at the elevator. If a doctor approached, they all had to stand aside to let the doctors go on the elevator first. So the hierarchy was very, very clear. And hierarchies are dangerous.
Hmm.
They've been shown in across many different industries. Hierarchies are dangerous. So one thing that clinics can do as a start to building psychological safety is think about, where what is our power differential? Where's our index in power distance, and how does it show? Because it can be quite subtle. So when I go into clinics, a culture really shows what is the culture here. And so in clinics where everybody calls the doctor so and so, I immediately go, okay, so we've got a visible power differential
Mm,
happening here. So if that is the culture of the clinic that you're working in, and maybe you just inherited this culture, you can start to work on changing it. Have the discussion with everyone. And I would start with the physicians because you want to make sure they're okay with it, and just explain
mhm,
why you want to switch to this first name basis, to build psychological safety so that it's safer for patients. People can speak up if they see something that doesn't seem right to them, if they feel safe to do so. So over time, you can switch over.
mhm.
And even if you say in front of patients, call me Dr. Smith, but
Sure.
when we're alone, I'm just, Michelle, whatever. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
so
I was smiling a little bit because so my dad's a doctor, and growing up, cold calls, had a house phone, and we'd get cold calls or whatever,
yeah,
and I'd answer the phone. Or no, sorry, my dad would answer the phone, and then he'd hand the phone to me when I was like 8 years old or whatever. And he'd say, "It's not for me, it's for you." And I'd answer the phone. They'd be like, "Hello, Mr. Nuttall." And I'd be like, and he's like, "It's not for me because I'm Dr. Nuttall." And it was a joke. Like he was
yeah,
joking, but it kind of like reminds me of that. And I joke with
yeah.
my friends, like, if you want to get on my dad's good side, call him Dr. Nuttall. But I mean, he's not, he's fine with that. But no, I get that like, and it's something that I think it would be something that maybe people haven't had a conversation about. Like, I mean, it's like one thing that happened and it's like, oh,
Mhm,
I better call the doctor. So always. And maybe it was one of those things where, oh, you happen to be in front of a patient and that's just what I prefer, or who knows, right?
mhm.
So I think that it's interesting, definitely to have when the conversation's missing, and to like identify that sort of differential when someone doesn't feel like they can speak up when
Mhm.
something might not be going well. And I think that's like, I think, it's kind of funny. I was in a meeting the other day and someone said, "Are we just all being like super polite Canadians here? Is that why no one's like actually saying like what's at stake and like what's not working?" Because this isn't a group setting, and it's like we're trying to figure out what wasn't working in this project. And um, it's almost like no one was saying anything because they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, or
Mhm.
and and not every conversation has that same life on the line experience as that one around the checking of the
Mhm.
medical procedure, but they do add up, right? And it creates a certain culture. So I mean, I'm very fascinated by what you're saying around just having those conversations and feeling
Yeah.
open to be able to have them.
Yeah. And then also fostering this, everybody knowing each other. So sometimes, some people approach work as work is work, and work should be all work, and there's no room
Hmm.
for, frivolous personal conversations. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. When people know each other on a personal level, that's when you really start to develop trust. And in order to have psychological safety, you have to have trust. So, you know what? Take the first 5 minutes of the day, ask people what's going on in their life. How was
Hmm.
how was your weekend? How did your mom's surgery go? That's what builds trust, when
For
you
sure.
show interest in a person, as a person, and when you create space for that, with your team. That's when you'll start to see people actually opening up and talking. Um, and then also when people know what each other do. So we
Mm,
talked about this a bit in the podcast,
yes.
but it's really important that people understand everybody else's role. And so they develop that respect for understanding what they do. And sometimes even it helps. People should be able to do aspects of each other's roles as well. And so a little bit of cross training makes for an efficient clinic. Um, but it's important. So I am a huge fan of the huddle, and it's a hard sell sometimes in clinics because they're like, we are busy, we don't
Yeah.
have time for this. But you don't have time not to do this. It's so important. So if you can just set aside even 10 minutes in the morning before clinic starts, gather around the EMR. Again, the physician, again taking the leadership role, would say, how is everyone today? Go around to each person, make sure that each person speaks. There are sometimes people who need a little coaxing to start to feel comfortable. So ask everyone, how are you? What's going on? How was your mom's surgery? How is everyone today? Has anyone got anything going on we need to know about? So sometimes people are like, oh, you know what? My kid, I think, might be sick. I may end up getting called out in the middle of the day. Okay, great. What are we going to do if that happens? What's our backup plan? Um, then we look at the EMR. Who's coming in today? Oh, Mrs. Jones. You know what? And the receptionist might say, oh, when Mrs. Jones booked her appointment, her mother had just passed away, and she was quite upset. She's coming in for a talk appointment. So everyone's aware of that. So when they see Mrs. Jones in the hallway, they're not like, hey, Mrs. Jones, how are you there? Everyone knows, okay, we're going to be respectful of where she's at. So it's just a heads up around who's coming in. This person's coming in for wart removal. Great. I'm the MOA. I'm going to make sure that the nitrous, the stuff they
Yep.
need is going to be
The stuff.
in the room when you need, like everything will be there when you need it. So it helps the team to coordinate and make things flow really smoothly, but it also creates that psychological safety. So it serves so many purposes. So huddles. Now you mentioned something about in your experience, and there's another thing about this power differential, and it's related to mitigated speech. So again, when there's low psychological safety, people will kind of hedge, and they don't say things clearly. If
Oh
they
yeah.
feel like they're low on the, if in that differential, if they're low, they won't come out and say what they need or what they want. They'll kind of couch it in a, is it okay if, would you mind? And then things get missed. So clarity in speech is much, much higher when there's psychological safety, when people can just say what they mean and, say what they need. And so our first animal in this one, the hippo, comes into play here in mitigated speech. So HIPPO stands for the highest paid person's opinion. And
Mm.
quite often in discussions where there's low psychological safety, everyone will just defer to the hippo in the room. Right? They don't even share their thoughts or opinions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when it may feel good to be the hippo, but if you realize, oh, like no one actually, I just, whatever I say just always goes, and no one
Mm.
expresses any opposite opinions or other thoughts, then you might have a psychological safety problem.
Yeah, I got it. No, and I was wondering where the hippo was going to come in, but
Yeah.
and just to take one step back, like what you said about the huddle, like I can see how you'd think, oh my gosh, like we don't have time for this. We don't
Yeah.
have time. Like we've got to get going. But I see that, it's almost like something that then translates into more efficiency or more
Mhm.
like to create that. It's like this maintenance, like the way that I see
Yes.
it. And like you've used a lot of great analogies, so I'm going to use one.
Okay.
I bought a road bike years ago, and they said every time you ride your bike, pump the tires. Like make sure your tires have the right pressure. And they said keeping your tires at the right pressure will actually help you avoid a lot of some of the bigger mechanical failures that bikes have. And it was like, so I just see that as like the pumping of the tires every day. Like, hey,
Yeah.
let's get those tires pumped. Let's see how
Yeah.
everyone's doing. Let's be aware of what's happening today, who's
Hmm.
coming in and why, which of the team members might be dealing with something. It sounds fantastic. Yeah,
Hmm. And it doesn't have to take long. They shouldn't take longer than about
sure.
10 minutes, really.
Mm,
It's they're quick, but
yeah,
they're super effective.
yeah. And then the hippo. I've definitely been in rooms where there was a hippo,
Yeah. Yeah.
where it was like everyone needs to be quiet because the hippo's speaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're just gonna go with what they say. There's no point in even speaking up.
Yeah.
And then when you've got that happening, the next thing that happens is silence. And so again, in a culture where there's low psychological safety, you'll see it in meetings. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Mm,
Crickets, right? And so that is a sign when things are getting pretty bad, when you just have a team that's not speaking up at all. So so this is where our next animal comes in. What you can do about this is start by addressing the elephant in the room,
mm,
because once you've got to the point of silence, you've got a deep problem, and you need to go deep. You need to open it up and just say, hey, like, something, we're in a bad place here. No one is speaking up. um, we want to know your thoughts. We want to know what's going on. And quite often at this point, it's not, you're probably beyond speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and you probably need to go to an anonymous, uh, like some sort of open
Mm-hmm.
anonymous. And then, but then what's critical, if people do that, if they share what's going on, if they take a risk, if they're at the point of being so disengaged that they're silent, if they actually tell you what's going on, do something with
Yeah.
that. If you don't, that's the kiss of death, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so really important. Engage the team by addressing the elephant in the room. Um, and then the other thing with that is model the behavior you want to see.
Mm-hmm.
So um, ask people, be curious. This is where we talk about having coaching conversations where instead of telling people things, you're asking, getting curious. Why do what is it about that is a problem? Or what do you guys think we could do about this? When has this happened in the past? And what did you do? What's been effective before? So just asking lots and lots of questions, and then following up. If they have suggestions for what you can
Mm-hmm.
do, follow through. Follow through.
Yeah. No, I got it. Like, it's definitely what I'm hearing is, certainly if you've gotten to a point where people feel like they can't speak, it's like
Mhm,
they're not being heard, even if they do speak. So there's no
mhm.
point. And then it's
Exactly.
like building your way back to that, which
Yeah.
may take some sort of system that's anonymous for people to
Mhm,
have that sense that they can talk again
mhm.
and like do something about it. Like, have
Yeah.
if people are sharing that, like, make sure that they feel heard, because
Mhm.
there's no point in talking if no one's listening.
Yeah, and
You
bring them in the rebuilding, right? Like
know. Mm-hmm.
bring them in, pull them
Yeah.
in close. Yeah. And so another thing that can be going on, and we'll get to our third animal, um, when people are actually not just disengaged, but have anxiety, like feel
Mm.
actually fear around speaking up. And so, just like our caveman ancestors, um, it would, if someone talked about, there is a lion around, it triggers our limbic system, that fear. And we go into what Daniel Goleman coined the term amygdala hijack.
Mm-hmm.
And so our body just releases all this cortisol and adrenaline and our fight or flight or freeze. And what happens in that case, so if you're in a meeting and someone is feeling really, for some people it's not feeling psychological safety, and then the fear that they're going to get called on to speak,
Mm.
that can cause an immediate amygdala hijack. And so what happens when that, for us, is our blood flow moves away from our cerebral cortex, where we
Mm.
have our reasoning, decision making, creativity, and it gets shunted back to the visual part of our brain, so that we've got really good, visual acuity, so we can see the lion in the bushes. But we can't think
Mm.
straight. We
Sure. No.
cannot think straight. And that lasts, once that's triggered, it lasts for a few hours. Like you're a waste of space after that. So if you've got people who are in that high anxiety state,
Mm.
they're not going to be creative. You're not going to have any innovation, and you're definitely probably not going to have any helpful input in meetings. It's depending on where a team is at with psychological safety, they may
Mm-hmm.
need to do some significant work just to get to the point where people feel uh, comfortable enough to speak.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I heard about this concept a few years ago, and I remember thinking, oh yeah, I can remember times when,
Mm.
and I mean, I also find it fascinating, like, where it comes from. Like, you're like, oh, it's something that physiologically was created for us to deal with actual danger that was in front of
Yeah.
us, like physical
Yeah.
danger, and now it's translated into the world of meetings and
Yeah.
all that. And I remember thinking, yeah, there are times in my life when I know, and I'm sure it's happened lots of times, where I've been in a complete hijack
Yeah.
and I could not think straight. It was like I was in a fog,
Yeah.
and I couldn't respond appropriately to things. Like, I was done for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a fun place to be at
No,
all.
no, no, for sure. For a lot of people, it's public speaking. You stand in front of the room and all of a sudden you just Words fail
Mm.
because your brain is just shut off.
For me, it's doing well. It's not. It doesn't make me shut off, but like one of my biggest fears is doing mental math in front of people.
Oh, me too. Me too.
I'm good at
Oh,
mental
yeah.
math, but if I have to do it in front of someone, not gonna
Mm-mm.
happen. Like I'm so afraid of doing it in front of clients because I'm like, if I mess this up, they're gonna think, who is this guy that thinks he's a financial planner? So I joke about it. I say to people like, I
Yeah.
would, and I multiply these simplest things with a calculator in front of people, and I'm sure they're like, what's going on here? But it's like I just get triggered. I'm like, I can't do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. Me too. Totally. So, so that was our three animals. We've covered them now. So now that's good. The title makes sense.
That makes absolute sense. The lions, hippos, and elephants. Oh my.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the next question would be, we've talked a little bit about what a physician leader can do. And so Amy Edmondson is sort of considered sort of the modern expert on psychological safety. And so she says, sort of there are three main things that a leader can do to try to start building that psychological safety with the team. And the first thing is to be really open about acknowledging your own mistakes. So really modeling, like, I'm fallible, I make mistakes. Please, please, when you see me doing something, let me know. I want to know. And when people do step forward, thank them, make it safe. And so you're just modeling the behavior that you want to see and helping to decrease that power differential. So that's a big step. Asking for feedback on how you're doing. So feedback is an amygdala trigger word in
Mm-hmm.
itself. It's when you say you're going to give someone feedback,
Mm-hmm.
but when you ask for it, that makes it easier. And especially when you're modeling, like, I want to learn, I want to get better, I trust you, and I want to hear from you. I want to know what you think and what your ideas are. That matters to me. And that there were two things that came out in a recent study about what builds trust. The number one thing was asking somebody for advice or asking them for feedback. So that's really big. Number two, incidentally, was sorry, this is about building trust in the workplace specifically. That was number one. Number two was attending the funeral of a loved one.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I guess again, showing that you care about the person as a person. But
Hmm.
yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So that asking for feedback, and then taking it well
Mhm.
when the feedback
Mhm.
comes in.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
And then encouraging questions and opinions,
Mm-hmm.
and not just doing it on a questions. Anyone? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
We're wrapped.
That doesn't
Like
work.
no,
That doesn't work at all ever.
no, no. So yeah, asking thoughtful questions, maybe expressing your opinion last, like asking what everyone
Mm,
else thinks first, um, and then really listening. So there's nothing worse than the illusion of feedback, like the illusion of
mm-hmm.
input. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we want to gather everyone's opinions, but we're just going to do what we want. You know,
Yeah.
but we asked you, so that counts for
Yeah.
something, right? So
The illusion of input.
yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Um, and then leaders can really important that you get to know the people on your
Yeah,
team.
for sure.
So again, huddles,
Mm-hmm.
great way to do that in a quick and efficient way. And there's actually been research about teams and clinic teams in particular that eat together are more effective.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's so spend that time,
Mm-hmm.
close the clinic over lunch, eat together. I mean, it may not be possible so much during COVID, but once you
Sure.
can, do it
Yeah.
again. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's neat.
And so leaders need to create that space, though. You have to
Yeah.
show that it's important, that you value it. And yeah. And then finally, and this is a big one, it's normalizing and even celebrating mistakes.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
that whole notion of failing forward, it's okay to make mistakes. And again, another study, they found that teams with high psychological safety who um, sort of embody everything we've been talking about, they report the most incidents.
Mm.
But it's not that they make more, they don't make more mistakes. They don't
No.
have more incidents. It's just the other teams cover it up.
Sure.
People don't feel safe to come forward when they've made a mistake. And so
No.
they hide it, but they don't learn
No.
and they don't evolve. So
No.
when you make it, you normalize, Everyone makes mistakes. I'm the doctor. Please, I'm going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Please, please, when you notice me doing something, you notice I missed something, bring it to my attention. And as a team, that's part of our culture. We're going to do that. And when you do, then you
Mm,
grow and you learn and you evolve and you get better and better and better. So, bring those mistakes forward, talk about them together, fix them together,
yeah.
and yeah. So those are some steps that
I
physicians can
love
take
it.
as leaders to kind of try to start building that.
Yeah, and I definitely think about the it's interesting. So I mean, I have the as we're recording this, I have a summit coming up,
Yeah.
that's all about physician well-being, and it's pretty interesting. So I went live with two of the physicians today, and they
Yeah.
were talking about what med school sort of
Uh,
instills in them, and like people who go to medicine are usually already high achievers, probably a bit of perfectionism kicking around, and then in med
mhm,
school it's kind of like even deepened. And this idea of celebrating mistakes, like pointing them out, noticing them, celebrating them, it's interesting, especially when you're saying it in the context of effective teams and patient care.
mhm.
If you identify the mistakes and feel the trust that you can mention them and bring them up and learn from them, and like change practices or change approaches, that's going to benefit people more than just
Absolutely.
pretending it never happened, obviously.
Yeah.
But when people don't
Yeah.
feel like they can share it, obviously, then they're just going to sweep it under the rug. So no, I find that it's very interesting. And I'm definitely seeing how teams and leadership can really impact the culture of a clinic and
Mhm,
ultimately the care of the patients.
mhm. Yeah, and where there's high functioning teams, there's the research has shown things that are not surprising. You've got happier employees and happier physicians, and teams are more efficient. But the thing that really surprised me is there's better patient outcomes.
Yeah, I believe it
So yeah,
for sure.
it's worth putting the effort in for sure.
It's
And
worth
it just
looking at.
feels good. Like it's
Feels
nice to
good.
go to
Yeah.
work and like the people you work with and feel like you can be yourself, you know, that you can be the real you and everyone accepts you. You can express your opinions, what you think and say matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
love
when
it.
that happens, when people feel that, they don't quit. And so
Mm,
one real big inefficiency in clinics is the revolving door,
sure.
right? When people don't feel part of the team, it's they're always looking for the next
Yeah.
better job. So when you've got this, people don't leave.
Yeah.
They don't leave, and so you don't waste so much time on training and
Training. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
People want to stay.
they
Cool. That's
do.
amazing. Sounds like a win all around.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this masterclass. Um, in case anyone hasn't checked you out yet, where is the best place for people to learn more about the work you do?
Yeah, so you can find me at the website www.michellehannay.com, and that's Michelle with one L, so MICHELEHANNAY.com.
Very cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.